Our presenter I'd like to introduce is Krisha Dhaliwal. Krisha is an immigration lawyer at Larley Rosenberg Barristers and Solicitors in Vancouver. She is also the chair of the Public Relations Policy and Advocacy Committee of the South Asian Bar Association of BC and volunteers with the organizing committee of the BC Islamophobia Legal Assistance Hotline. Please help me welcome Krisha.
Thank you, everyone. So as was stated, I'm an immigration and refugee lawyer, and I'm also a member of the South Asian Bar Association of BC. And the South Asian Bar Association of BC was one of the founding organizations of the BC Islamophobia Legal Assistance Hotline. So I'm here to talk a little bit today about how the hotline started, what exactly it is that we do, and just some of the organizing principles that we were kind of founded on. So the first thing I'll address is what we are. So the Islamophobia Legal Assistance Hotline, or ILA, is a phone line that individuals can call to obtain free, confidential legal information and advice if they feel that they've been discriminated against, harassed, or if they've faced violence because they are Muslim or because they've been perceived to be Muslim. So the number for the hotline is 604-343-3828, and it is operated by volunteers from a legal nonprofit organization called Access Pro Bono. Our other supporting organizations include the South Asian Bar Association, the National Council of Canadian Muslims, the BC Public Interest Advocacy Centre, the Federation of Asian Canadian Lawyers of BC, the BC Community Legal Assistance Society, the BC Civil Liberties Association, the Canadian Association of Black Lawyers of BC, and the Canadian Bar Association of BC. So you can really see that a huge number of both cultural groups and kind of legal public interest groups have come together to support this initiative. So how did ILA start? ILA started in late 2015 when a group of lawyers and people that worked with nonprofit legal organizations in British Columbia came together after we all kind of individually started realizing that we were hearing about these incidents of Islamophobia happening in our communities. We were hearing stories from clients that we were working with, from our own friends, from family members. We were hearing an increase in stories that were being covered by the media, and the kinds of topics that were being discussed ranged from issues around discrimination in the workplace, to racial comments being made to people in public places. And so when we started to hear about the number of incidents, just anecdotally, we started to wonder whether there were any financial, linguistic, or cultural barriers in place that were preventing people from accessing legal support when they've experienced these kinds of issues. So we started to put together a plan on how we might go about overcoming these barriers. So what we wanted to do was make sure that people who've suffered from these forms of discrimination because of their faith and or because of their racial background knew that there were lawyers in BC who were really committed to assisting with the really difficult, challenging task of holding people who commit these kinds of accounts to account by our legal institutions. And so what we came up with was this idea to start a confidential free phone line that would focus on how to provide services to communities that were affected by Islamophobia. We also decided to start looking at ways to do more outreach in communities that were affected by Islamophobia so that we could really promote awareness of what discrimination is legally and what your rights actually are as a resident of British Columbia. So how does ILA work? We set up a hotline that people can call on a confidential basis to talk to a lawyer about possible discrimination claims, hate crimes, or other Islamophobia-based legal problems for no charge. We'll also be documenting, without identifying information, the types of issues that are being reported through this hotline. So of course, because we're a legal organization and because we're connecting individual callers to lawyers, there's a concern about confidentiality issues. So we really want to make sure that everyone that phones us understands that whatever they speak to a lawyer about is fully confidential, and it's not going to go to anyone else without that individual person's permission. So what actually happens when someone calls is that an intake worker answers all calls. So during the daytime, when there's actually physically a person sitting there, they answer all the phone calls. And in the evening and overnight, when we don't have someone who's manning the phone line, people are able to leave messages. And so all calls and messages are answered. And what happens is the intake caller will assess based on what the caller says to figure out what the issue is. And if we determine that there's a legal component, or there may be a legal component to the caller's problem, that individual is then referred to a lawyer that specializes in that relevant area of the law. And that lawyer will then speak with them pro bono. And we maintain a kind of running roster of lawyers who specialize in different areas of the law and who are willing to work with us and take on these pro bono files. So another thing to note is that while we are run by lawyers, and what we mainly do is connect individuals to legal services, often people who phone us are also referred to other services outside the legal arena. So we provide referral information to victim support services, to free and sliding scale counseling services, to community-based victim services, and to other multilingual legal resources that are available for people. And just to reiterate, we answer every phone call and message. And so if someone calls and they're unable to communicate in English, or they feel as though they're not able to effectively communicate their problem in English, we will do our best to locate a translator who will be willing to work on a confidential, obviously, and volunteer basis to help, again, make that communication process as effective as possible. Because again, when we were doing our community outreach, one of the issues that we realized was that there's a linguistic problem oftentimes, especially when you're looking at people who are maybe recent immigrants. Language is one of the things that they're still developing, and so we want to make sure that we are able to effectively overcome that problem. So I wanted to briefly touch on the issue of Islamophobia because it's a word that people are using a lot right now. People are hearing the term a lot, and Handel did a great job of touching on some of that vocabulary and the ways in which it's used and how it can be complicated by a number of different factors. But I wanted to briefly look at how ILA understands Islamophobia. So we recognize that Islamophobia can be experienced in a lot of different ways. Some of the examples are harassment, bullying, profiling, so by authority figures making assumptions based on the fact that you're Muslim or look like you're Muslim, issues of exclusion, so property destruction, and the list goes on. And we knew that Islamophobia wasn't only targeted at Muslims. We wanted to make sure that we were inclusive to people who were being perceived as Muslims as well. And I think that that's one important thing to note about Islamophobia. People who are Islamophobic, people who discriminate, people who are racist, they don't know about the cultures that they're discriminating against. They don't know about the religions of the people that they're discriminating against. And so we want to make sure that we're providing services to everyone who's affected by this issue, whether or not they're actually Muslim. We also wanted to make sure, again, to deal with that language issue, that we would be able to offer our website information in a number of different languages. So we're still trying to expand to more, but there's a list just on the slide here at the bottom of some of the languages that the website is translated in. So the last thing that I wanted to touch on is just the issue of why we need ILA. So, as I said earlier, ILA was started at a time when we were hearing an increase in reported incidents of racial and faith-based discrimination in Canada, and also outside of Canada, all around the world. And we at ILA believe that Canadians really need to start speaking openly and publicly, and using the language, using the words, calling these things what they are, saying racism, identifying Islamophobia, identifying xenophobia, and to recognize that Canada is not immune to these problems, as the recent horrific tragedy in Quebec demonstrates. These are problems that we have in our own country. And we at ILA have a vision that the legal community, at least in British Columbia, will come together and make a really clear statement that racism, discrimination, and xenophobia are not acceptable. And we want each BC resident to be aware of what their rights are. We want to stop Islamophobic rhetoric. And we want our Muslim friends, family, and neighbors to know that they're valued and that we will do what we can to protect them. So we believe that legal education and unfettered legal access to legal support is going to promote all of these goals. And that's, just to reiterate, our website and the phone number. So thank you so much.